Hi, and welcome to Ethnographic Imagination Basel, a series on reimagining the world from the mundane. My name is George Pomeu, and in this episode, we will talk about trance, the state of ecstasy and exuberance associated with mediumship and being possessed. Our guest is Michaela Schäuble, whose scholarly work explores innovative ways to engage experiences of being in trance through writing, film, and photography. So stay with us for a conversation on how ecstatic experience can help us rethink our engagements with the world at large. Michaela Schäuble is professor of social anthropology at the University of Bern, Switzerland. An award-winning documentary filmmaker, she is co-founder and co-director of Ethnographic media space Bern, a creative collective of anthropologists engaged in audiovisual methods as part of knowledge production. She has previously taught at the University of Manchester in England and the Martin Luther University in Halle Wittenberg, Germany. Professor Schäuble researches broadly media and audiovisual anthropology, religion, social memory, gender, space, and nationalism. She's author of Narrating Victimhood, Gender, Religion, and the Making of Place in Post-War Croatia, a book published by Berkhan in 2014. She is also author of numerous articles and chapters on topics as diverse as Mediterranean anthropology, anthropology of post-socialism, ritual and commemoration, masculinity and placemaking, as well as ethnographic methods beyond the written word. One of her current projects focuses on the phenomenon of Tarantism in southern Italy, an ensemble of bodily afflictions and healing practices that involve trance-like experiences. Our conversation will focus today on trance, forms of possession and mediumship that have not yet only preoccupied anthropologists for a very long time, but also troubled their ability to comprehend and represent. Michaela, we are very happy that you accepted the invite to Ethnographic Imagination Basel, and welcome.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
For those members of our audience who might not be familiar with phenomena like trance other than seeing them spectacularized somewhere, what does it mean to be in trance-like states? And perhaps we can also begin thinking about how anthropologists, as opposed to others, have looked at these modes of being.
First of all, simply put, I would say trance means an altered state of consciousness, an altered state of mind. It has the same root, Latin root, as transit, so being transported elsewhere. And I would say that one of the conundrums is that you can see the person, a body is still there, but the mind might be wandering off or might be in a different place. And put otherwise, very often trance has also ecstasy, states of ecstasy, or you also mentioned already, spirit possession, can be seen as the body of the person who themselves become. Then the medium is being transpersed by transcendent beings, by spirits, by otherworldly beings, and being taken in possession. So. Anthropologists, I would say, have looked at this, as for a long time from very different perspectives. Very often, almost all the time, taking collective experiences and the social aspects of it into consideration, seeing this as part of collective rituals, for example, or as a way to in a rather functionalist way, as something dealing with conflict or with in times of crisis, as a way of, as a community getting together, bringing problems out in the open, very much comparable to maybe a psychoanalysis, just in a very collective communal way, on a personal as well as also on a communal level. If we, for example, think about shamanism as a person, a ritual expert, then getting into a trance, traveling to another world and solving problems there, coming back, reporting from the travels they might have undertaken, and trying to reintegrate the person who had a problem or the conflicting parties, and trying to settle whatever has been out of an equilibrium. Very often this has also been seen in context of marginalized people, populations, very often also women or people who have been suppressed, who didn't have other means of expressing their unease or whatever situations they were in. So this was something as a public display. Very often it's been interpreted like this. Jenny's Body, for instance, right, writing about Tsar cults in Sudan or in Egypt. I find that a very, very interesting interpretation. And this, of course, there I would say anthropological readings of trance differ, of course, from physiological interpretations that would focus on the bodily or physiological aspects, or for instance trance inducing drugs or rhythms, dances that change the heartbeat and so on and so forth. I mean, anthropologists also take those into consideration, that are often also in place, not always, I would say, but that's also one way of explaining how these states can happen, but it wouldn't explain fully why.
Of course,
why they're used. Yeah.
But what you're mentioning, I think, is very important, because it's whatever is lived at the level of an individual body, a certain kind of pressure, conflict, contradiction is something that comes from the social. So our own well-being, or the lack thereof, are shaped by the positions which we occupy in a society, whether it's a marginal position or a conflictual position with conflicting obligations. So what you described as a functionalist sort of approach to trance would be a form of abreaction, a form of letting out the kind of bodily tensions that emerge in such conflictual predicaments. But then that's one explanation. I'm thinking what other things anthropologists might have thought of, especially in the relationship with the world of spirits. Is it also some tapping into other forms of power? To mobilize for the here and now, or something?
Definitely. I mean, it's tapping, to use your words, into a realm that is very different from the reality of everyday life, of the reality as it is usually known. So, for instance, ontological approaches that would take other realities serious would interpret trance as also maybe as a form of communication between this world and another world, or as a way of the other world making itself visible or being felt or being experienced in this world, or individuals being able to travel back and forth. This is, of course, I would say, different from states of trance that are sometimes also thought for entertainment, that I think should also not be underestimated. If I think of fun fairs, for instance, roller coasters or carousels that also have been described as vertigo machines, in German Schwindelmaschinen, or just music that is not by coincidence called trance, or drugs that are called ecstasy.
Right.
I mean, as deliberately inducing those states as something pleasurable, or something that is thought to as a maybe a diversion from the everyday. So
I was thinking also of disco experiences, being on the dance floor in the rhythms where the beat of the music becomes deeply corporeal.
Yes.
And there too, under the influence of alcohol or kind of drugs. But one can say that those two might have some sort of therapeutic role or significance, among other things. Already in your work in Croatia, questions of ritual and religious commemoration were central to what you were doing, how you were thinking about history, how you were thinking about nationalism, globalization, these larger scale issues. How did you come to being interested then, if not immediately in trance as such, then maybe in this kind of ecstatic experiences more broadly? Is this something that already started with your work in Croatia, or is this something that started when you became interested in southern Italy?
No, I think it already started before my current research in Italy, although I wouldn't claim that I encountered states of trance during my research in Croatia. But what was very apparent was in probably ecstatic forms of veneration of saints, and in my particular field work, the saint being the Virgin Mary. Veneration and of the Virgin Mary, also Marian apparitions, was something that played a crucial role in my research in post-war Croatia, and a lot also has been written on the role of maybe the political instrumentalization also of religion, and particularly the Virgin Mary in Croatian nationalism, for example, and at the outset of the war, and also during the course of the Yugoslav wars. Yeah.
And speaking of states of contradictions that are lived at the body state, I can imagine post-war Croatia, a period of so-called transition, might have itself had all these contradictory forces that people had to cope with. So the devotion to the Virgin Mary, was it also playing out with some of those, or enabling people to live through some of those moments of transition?
I don't know if I would go that much into that therapeutic direction there, but rather also look at the historic role, also very strong symbolism in Marian apparition as sort of the historically also a warrior saint, and she was very much also the patron saint of soldiers of the Croatian army. There's a lot of documentation that Croatian soldiers would wear rosaries and would sort of go to war with sort of a divine blessing, for instance. But this very strongly related to Croatia as a nation, and Virgin Mary being conceptualized as the Queen of the Croats. So a very strong politicization, let's say. So this is of course also something. The ecstatic saint veneration states of trance, for instance, it's not just an individual thing, but it's something that of course lends itself also to being strongly instrumentalized, or I mean, it's not outside the sphere of power relations. I would say, like every ritual is also embedded in
And charismatic leadership of populism comes with all forms of veneration that can verge into trance. And what you actually just described here also makes me think whether there is a difference of kind or just a difference of degree between something like veneration on the one hand and ecstasy
certainly
on the other.
Yeah.
But then Tarantism caught your attention. Tarantism in southern Italy. What is Tarantism, and how did you come to be interested in it?
Okay, there's whole libraries written on what it is, but maybe it's easiest to just quickly say how I encountered it first, or how I came across it. That is through films being made in the 1950s and 1960s by Italian filmmakers. Not quite neo-realist, but a very unique form of Italian documentary cinema in connection to anthropologist Ernesto De Martino, and that's a very unique set of anthropological films. And as you mentioned at the beginning, I'm trained as a filmmaker, and when I saw these films, I was very much intrigued by what I had seen, and also puzzled because on the one hand, sort of an extreme aestheticization of, maybe there it converges again, ecstatic saint veneration and practices of magic within Europe, maybe also practice that you would not expect maybe in Europe, that you would imagine to happen elsewhere. So it's that's also something that I'm very much interested, also of course, in the exoticization and romanticization of these practices and techniques, so to speak. So Tarantism, maybe broadly defined, would be it's endemic to southern Italy, spider possession cult. Some would say it goes back all the way to the Greek Dionysian cults, because this is in Puglia, part of Magna Graecia. So sort of that was colonized by Greek forms of civilization, and there's a lot of literature that would link this back to the Manads, to the Corribante of that time, and then the cult has been incorporated into Christianity and is now strongly associated with with the cult of Saint Paul. So, Sao Paulo.
Just to clarify a bit for our audience that might not be familiar with this, the idea is that a spider bite can cause a certain kind of affliction, and how would that play out?
Yes, that's one of the many explanations, but that's the symbolism and the imaginary that plays into it. So the people, mainly women, and it's actually mainly women in marginalized positions, doing very hard physical work in the fields in the summer heat. Also, this mainly happens in the summer heat, in the tobacco fields. Working under the heat, maybe also not having eaten very much, being then bitten by a spider, and the poison of the spider causing extreme reactions of poisoning, but also of states that are very that would range from lethargy, migraines, being physically ill, to this ecstatic trance dancing that is then related to the tarantella, this form of music, the little taranta. So it's cured then, this affliction, women sort of also screaming and acting in a very transgressive way, would then be thought to have been bitten by the spider and have to sweat the poison out. So bands of music would be sort of would be called to play in the homes of the afflicted, mainly women. Terapia domiciliare, home therapies, and they would play sometimes days on end, and the women would dance to these tunes, and the particular tunes would relate. It would be a way to detect what kind of spider this is, and then so with the melodies and the rhythms, the women could be either aggravated or calmed down, and then in certain choreographic cycles they would dance to complete exhaustion, collapse, start anew, and so on and so forth. So,
as a path to healing,
as a form of therapy, and very often during these therapies, they would hear messages from Sao Paulo, the saint, who would very often has been reported in the literature. Also, people I've talked to, that he would ask the women to read a mass for him or to visit him in his chapel, and sort of in a form of exchange for healing. Interestingly, the saint in this Catholic form of thinking about this is the saint is the one who gives the illness, but also has the power to elevate it, to grant the grace. So very often these women would then be brought to the chapel to then pray to the saint directly.
One thing that I find fascinating about your work and your methods, the way you engage with it, is the following. And please correct me if I'm describing it wrongly.
Yeah.
There is the Tarantismo, and then there is all the discourse and all the representation from the Martino onward to the very present, where reenactments of Tarantism healing are performed, often in the front of tourists and various kinds of cameramen and so on and so forth. And this leads one to say, well, what is the separation between the real and representation? Is this a question of authenticity, or does the problem have to be put completely differently? And you engage this, both the practice and the archive, probably together, as things that one can transpose rather than translate through film, photography, multimodal sort of methodologies. Tell us more about that, if that's a correct representation.
I think it is. I think it's very much at the core of what I'm trying to do. So I'm not so much interested in questions of authenticity, because what I've also mentioned before is that, of course, part of these public performances of Affliction is exactly that there is a public, that this, sort of the women who suffer from Tarantism, or who would self-identify as Tarantate, would need sort of an audience to act out their affliction and to bring things to a public acknowledgement. So I wouldn't say that now the aspect that there's camera teams present, or that there is an audience or a touristic audience, is necessarily inauthentic.
Absolutely.
Because I would say also the aspect of an audience and of a community is crucial to this. But so what I'm particularly interested in is how these images. So Ernesto de Martino is probably also, it's interesting or important to know that he was working with reenactments also as a research method, because these things are very often difficult to research on site or at the very moment. You can't just be there when something like this happens. So very often, to study the choreographic patterns or the choreotic moments, he was also asking women to do the dance moves, to play the particular tunes and so on. So he was very much working with reenactments to study this in what he would call rites in action, to break it down to certain patterns as well. And I wouldn't deny that there's also, as I said, choreographies or patterns to it. So we have a large set of an archive of audiovisual multimodal materials that attest to this. And this archive is very known to the people in Puglia today. So it's interesting. For me, I'm very much interested in what happens if these images, and the sound recordings are very important as well, if they return to the sites where they were taken, and how are they appropriated or reappropriated what role do they play in of people refamiliarizing themselves with these traditions, also critically engaging, of course, with the roles of the anthropologists at that time, who were, of course, also employing methods that are very difficult to say the least, and that have also stigmatized the people in Salento for a long time. So this is also, those are forms. So the reenactments have many different, very different means. It's also a form of cultural heritageization, I would say.
There is actually precisely that paradox here, it seems to me as well, which it's partially also an ethical paradox, that on the one hand, it is very easy to represent such phenomena in ways that spectacularize them, that exoticize them. There is a kind of ready intelligibility for that sort of thing in our public culture.
Yeah.
On the other hand, just not disengaging with these things would be such a loss, because they do push the imagination, it seems, to think of broader, deeper issues. And one of these issues that I saw in your work is thinking beyond representation. What is then the role of something like film?
I would say, thinking beyond representation, also strongly thinking beyond realism or realist representation, beyond representation. I don't think it's a coincidence that, filming states of trance has been there almost from the beginning of the invention of the filmic camera. So Margaret Mead and Gregory Bateson were making these films on trance and dance in Bali, and then all the way from Maya Deren was in contact with them and taking up these ideas, trying to then also film voodoo ceremonies in Haiti. And there's a very, very long tradition that is exactly dealing with this epistemological or also ontological problem, because you cannot. Well, it's a visual and it's an audiovisual medium, but you cannot see what you're actually filming. What you can see is the person that might look the same or behave slightly different, but of course the entity that is that claims to be there, that transcendental presence or the deity or the spirit de Loa, whatever you want to call it, would make themselves visible through the bodies of the people present. So for me, filmic ways of trying to, and I deliberately wouldn't say represent that, but I think one way of dealing with this would be an attempt to create again an experience through film, or to work also with what you said, imagination, work with montage, work with artistic means, and trying to break that one-to-one attempt to representation. So, for instance, the surrealists have been very interested in these methods, of course, in their art, very much to getting, trying to access unconscious modes of
being,
of being, thinking, experiencing. Of course, also the multisensory ways. Also in going back to Croatia, people were telling me how when they had an apparition of the Virgin Mary, how that smelled. That there was a smell of roses, for instance. It's not just sort of a vision, but there's very different sensory capacities involved as well.
So instead then of a realist representation, which the idea is to leave behind, maybe there's some sort of a transmission that's meant to be happening there, or maybe there's a better word of something, but one wonders what that something is. And in your written work, you also refer back to Jean Rouch, the famous filmmaker, and his Les Maîtres Fous, the Mad Masters, which is plays with that sort of state of trance in what was then colonial Ghana. And not as much as to represent, but perhaps to transmit something of some sort of subjective experience, or create a subjective experience.
Yeah, I mean, that is highly controversial, of course, as well, because he has also been reproached of being, portraying people in these states of frenzy or ecstasy that might also, of course, lend to extremely racist interpretations, because you can't really make sense of people act very differently or in excess of what an everyday behavior would be. But what's interesting about Jean Rouge is that, for instance, in this connection, the term ciné trance is attributed to him, that he said that the technology of the camera itself is something that might help induce those states. So in filming a different film that was not in Le Maître Fou, he would say that the spirits wouldn't arrive, but as soon as his camera was running, that would help to get the whole ritual going. And so he would also describe how the people he was working with would see that he, as a filmmaker, with operating the camera, would change and would be in a state where he would be transported elsewhere that had then been translated almost to a state of trance. So this is very often also seen as parallel, as in early filmmaking, the sort of watching films in a dark theater and stroboscopic effects would itself be disorienting, and so the medium itself being something that has capacities that are very, very close or could be closely related to experiences of being transported elsewhere, of course. Yeah.
So not outside the experience, but part and parcel of
exactly,
that
and
making.
as an embodied, as you mentioned it before, as an embodied experience as well. Yeah.
Right. Michaela, we should tell our audience that you are currently working, co-directing a film with Anya Treczke called Tarantism Revisited, and encourage everyone to look out for the film. And we are out of time, so I want to thank you very much for this insightful conversation, and it provoked a lot of questions and thought, and I look forward to continue this conversation in the future.
Thank you very much. Thank you.